Hello, and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. Today's episode is going to be a controversial one, not because the topic is new or far-fetched, far from it. The topic has been swirling around for quite a number of years. It's a topic that gets many people angry, and it looms like a cold fear inside other people. These people who just don't dare raise the question out loud, but quietly wonder it to themselves all the time. Could it be? Is it possible? And what does it mean if it is really true? What next for me and my family? What next for our lives, our community, our nation? What next for humanity? I want to be very clear about this before we go any further. This is not an accusation. To some people, it will sound like an accusation, but that's something they will be hearing inside their minds because it's what they want to hear. They want to hear it that way. It makes them feel better to hear it in a way that they can blame on someone else, me perhaps. And so, no, this is not an accusation, but it is a question that's been asked by many people all over the world. And there is speculation about it all over the world too. Some believe it's true. Others believe not only that it's untrue, but even perhaps that the opposite is true. And then there are those who like to say that the entire question is ridiculous, mindless conspiracy, clickbait, slanderous, or even cruel. So, what is the question that we will be tackling today? Well, let me tell you what it is, nearly. The question is one that has been asked consistently for at least 8 years, maybe 9, by someone in the world, many people, in fact, every single day, several times a day. There are even religious organizations around the world that are writing about it in their church newsletters to their practitioners to help them to come to grips with this question. The most terrifying of prospects, if it happens to be a question to which the answer is yes. Because if the answer is yes, then humanity is embarking on a horrific moment in time, unprecedented, excruciating, something that was predicted long ago and to which much of the world has been taught to believe in, so deeply that it's a fundamental component of who they are. It's the blood which pulses through their veins and the foundation for everything they know about themselves, the world, and the existence of life and reality. So after that big drum roll, what is the question? Well, the question is Donald Trump the Antichrist? Now, in the very first instant that I stated these words, is Donald Trump the Antichrist, what went through your mind? Be honest with yourself. Did you think, yes, he is? Or did you think, no, that's ridiculous? Did you think there is no Antichrist? Or did you perhaps think, Obama is the Antichrist, so the job is already taken? Or did you think, oh no, this is going to be all about politics and Ellie, well, she's just a radical lefty with an agenda? Regardless of what your first instinctive thought was in the moment, the fact is that the question of whether Donald Trump is the Antichrist, well, it's a question that's been circulating widely around the world for years. Some people think he's so awful that he must be the Antichrist. Others wish he was the Antichrist, because then it would mean that the end times are here and that Jesus is returning soon. And then other people, well, there are people out there, and perhaps it's them, the ones who perhaps have never even considered that an Antichrist was a real thing. And they're finding themselves wondering for the first time in their lives if perhaps they had been mistaken all these years, and that maybe, just maybe, the Bible that they thought was nonsense might have actually been speaking of something true. So why not tackle the question? But not just by rambling off passages from the Bible and either declaring or dismissing the case. I'm not actually as radical a lefty as some people would like to believe, after all. And if I'm going to tackle the question on this show, then I want to do it more from the perspective of finding and discussing the evidence for and against, rather than just rambling on with a preconceived viewpoint that I'm trying to prove true. I am actually more a middle of the row independent thinker who tends to lean left in some of my opinions and lean right in other opinions. As it happens, there are a few more left viewpoints than right viewpoints, but it's really splitting hairs for me, and I take it on a case by case basis. I just believe in being a good person, trying hard to be honest and hardworking and decent towards other people, and I care for my fellow human beings, and I want there to be less sadness, anger, and cruelty in the world. And I hope that I'm living my life in a way that does a little to make things better rather than worse. And I know that I'm not perfect, and that's okay too. I've also had experiences over the past 8 or 9 years that leave me wondering. I'm only here with you on this radio show because of a series of events that took place to bring me here, and Donald Trump is one of those series of events. I've spoken at length about my life and my history and the events that brought me to where I currently am. And all of this information can be found in previous episodes of the show. I've also had some very peculiar encounters in my life in the past 8 or 9 years, which leave me wondering even more about what the answer to the question of Donald Trump and the Antichrist might be. But I will tell you this. I've also done tarot readings on the question, and from what I can understand, using the language of the cards as my guide, which I do and have done for 35 years, it appears that Donald Trump is not the Antichrist. What I mean by that is that according to the tarot cards, the Antichrist of Antichrist, because according to the Bible, there are many Antichrists that appear throughout the evolution of humanity, but the mother of all Antichrists, the Antichrist, well, according to the tarot cards, Donald is not the one. He'd probably be disappointed in hearing that answer, actually, because as we know, he does like to be number one. But according to the tarot readings that I've done, no, he's not number one at all, not when it comes to the Antichrist. But the cards have, on numerous occasions, in fact, on every occasion, seemingly confirmed to me that he is some kind of an agent of an Antichrist concept in some way. Because if Christ is love, which the Bible seems to think is the case, then a person who creates an opposition to love, whether it be hate or fear, is the anti of love, and therefore the anti of Christ. Perhaps not personified, but certainly acting as an agent. And that's another reason why I'd like to look at the question closer and from a non-tarot perspective. I'd like to see what kind of evidence is out there. Because as much as I love reading the tarot cards, and as much as I've got 35 years of experience reading the cards, that have provided me with consistent messages over the years and have been, probably 99% reliable for me during my whole life. It's still tarot, which is, I guess, you could say a speculative thing rather than an empirical thing. So why not try another method of analysis and see what comes of it? Why not delve directly into the source of all Antichrist wisdom, a source of information about the Antichrist that people have been studying for much longer than my 35 years of reading tarot cards? So let's begin in this most obvious of places, the Bible, because that is where the concept of the Antichrist was first introduced as a concept. And let's do this carefully rather than quickly. I only have an hour-long show, but the Bible is a massive source of information. So I'm going to devote 2 episodes to this research. And then once we're done, I'll see if I can offer you the most logical synopsis of what the research has revealed. And my honest, no holes barred viewpoint about what the answer might be. And the good thing is that I'm not a religious person, so I won't be automatically assuming anything from that standpoint. But I'm also not an atheist. In fact, I'm in a strange place where, when it comes to the Bible, I've heard every word of the Bible, and I've been studying it a little from a research perspective more than any other kind of thing, because I want to understand. And I've sort of come to the understanding that the bare bones of the Bible is that it is a true story about something, but I'm just not convinced that it is what they say it is from an official religious perspective. And I also believe that quite a lot of it has been manipulated in order to push forward some kind of an agenda. But by who? And what exactly is the agenda meant to be? So, as you can see, I'm the perfect person to look at the question of whether Donald Trump is the Antichrist based on what's written in the Bible, because I really do not know how I feel about what's written in the Bible. I really do not. So, why not start from that perspective and see what we come up with? So, let's begin this journey, shall we? Strap in? Okay. So, our first step is to make sure we understand exactly what we mean by the term Antichrist. The concept of the Antichrist has been interpreted in various ways throughout history, primarily within Christian theology. There are four main theories about the Antichrist, and a long list of fringier theories also exist. But today, it might be a good idea, it might be best, just to stick to the main four theories. The first theory is that the Antichrist is the son of Satan, in the same way that Jesus Christ is considered to be the Son of God. Satan is an entity that appears in the three main Abrahamic religions, with only slight deviation between them. Satan is also known as the devil, and generally is an entity that is associated with sins, trickery, and lies. In Judaism, Satan is considered to be an adversary to God, someone who refused to be subservient or in God's shadow. In Christianity, Satan is generally seen to be a fallen angel who rebelled against God. In Islam, Satan is an entity made from fire who was cast out of heaven and takes his revenge by infecting the minds of humans with evil intention and a desire for sinful behavior. Just as Jesus is portrayed in the Bible as the perfectly good human, the Antichrist is portrayed to be the perfectly evil human. It was around 1,000 years after the Bible had been compiled that more clarity about the Antichrist was found, and this created a second path of interpretation. A French nobleman and Benedictine monk created a narrative about the Antichrist being a Jewish trickster and a tyrant, born in Babylon and belonging to the tribe of Dan, which is one of the 12 tribes of Israel described in the Old Testament. The narrative also clarified that the Antichrist would be accepted as the Messiah and ruler of Jerusalem, and that this would act as a gateway to his eventual growth to becoming the ruler of the entire world. The New Testament also provides another third interpretation, that the Antichrist is a tempter who performs a series of wonders, a bit like miracles, as a way of tricking people into believing that he is Christ and therefore deserving of divine honors. And the fourth interpretation is very similar, wherein the Antichrist pretends to be Jesus Christ and manages to take the world over at a time referred to as the apocalypse. The various interpretations all basically come from various passages in the Bible, and depending on which passages you rely upon, the Antichrist can differ slightly. Because just as God and Jesus are assumed to have many different names in the Bible, so does the Antichrist. So depending on which names are assumed to be his, then more and more attributes for the Antichrist can be adopted. The key thing to note about the Antichrist is that he is anti-Christ. Christ, particularly when it comes to the New Testament, is seen to be an embodiment of love. Christ actually is love in the New Testament, and so the anti of love is the Antichrist. But more specifically, the anti of love, and therefore the anti of Christ, is a series of things that are described in detail in the Bible. We're going to go through some of the most significant passages in the Bible when it comes to the Antichrist, so that we can compare those things to what we know of Donald Trump. But here are the general principles arising from all of the Bible's teachings that can be attributed to the Antichrist on the principles of being anti-love. So firstly, the Antichrist is a figure who is against or opposed to Christ, opposed to love, Anti is a word that can also mean instead of. In this context, the Antichrist is a figure who will pretend to be Christ or who will be happy to be mistaken for or assumed to be Christ. The Antichrist is also someone who may reject love. Now, this can be seen in two different ways. Either the Antichrist rejects love by existing in a manner that seemingly opposes the way of love, or they reject the idea that love and therefore Christ even exists. The Antichrist is referenced many times as being associated with falsehoods and blasphemy. He boasts a lot about himself. He speaks arrogant words against others who may even be in power, and he requires that people worship him. He will also be ruthless without compassion towards others. As a result, he will persecute, torture, and kill people while he's in power. According to the Bible, the Antichrist is in power for 42 months. But the description of what is meant by the word power isn't clarified, so we don't really know if it means that he will be in a position of power for that time or whether he will give a practical display of power for that time. There is, as we know, a difference between having the title of someone who's powerful and actually exerting a powerful influence over others. They are two different things. So now let's take a look at a variety of passages in the Bible and compare what they say to what we know about Donald Trump. For anyone who wants to get geeky and check up on my research, I'm looking at the Bible references as provided by the online source BibleGateway.com, and I'm looking at the New King James Version specifically. I've done searches on the Antichrist by using the word Antichrist, but also the other names that he's called in the Bible, according to theologians. And there are many names to list. So he's also called the promise that shall come, a fierce king, a master of intrigue, a despicable man, a worthless shepherd, the one who brings destruction, the lawless one, the evil man, and the beast. I expect that there are other names for the Antichrist in the Bible, but these are the ones I've searched for in order to obtain the passages from the Bible that I'm working with. So there are two different ways to be able to look at the Antichrist in comparison to the verses in the Bible. Firstly, by the defining characteristics of the Antichrist as a person, and then secondly, as the defining characteristics of placement, and that relates to the geography and the events that take place around this supposed Antichrist. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the characteristics of the Antichrist, and next week we're going to hone down even deeper into some of the situational or geographic elements to see whether there are comparisons there. First of all, John 4:3 states that every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God, and that this is the spirit of the Antichrist. This very first example of reference to the Antichrist would actually apply to anyone. I mean, I'm not a religious person, and I am somewhat skeptical about the Bible or undecided. I do believe that its skeleton is based on a true story of something that occurred between the cosmos and the earth, that is likely to do with the creation of the world and humanity, and our reality and the rules for our existence. But I also believe that a lot of the Bible is also fabricated or twisted to serve a purpose of some kind. And for this reason, I don't confess Jesus automatically because I'm kind of skeptical that the Bible is word for word accurate. So I have my doubts. And I'm only one of many millions who feel this way. So that would make us all spirits of the Antichrist if that passage is true. But I do believe in love and the power of it and the fact that it is our purpose for life. And so do many others who may still be skeptical of the concept of Jesus. So millions are swept up into this first definition of the Antichrist. But it doesn't mean that millions of people aren't from God, because the Bible doesn't say that anywhere. And Donald Trump may or may not be one of us millions. So I think this particular first passage in the Bible that I'm referencing isn't very clarifying. It's very non-specific and could apply to everyone or maybe no one. So I wouldn't automatically associate it with Donald Trump specifically. Okay, so let's move on to another passage. John 2:18 says that just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many antichrists have appeared. This passage indicates that other antichrists have existed on earth or are already here and that more are coming. Nothing specific to Donald Trump or that can be attributed to him. Similarly, John 1:7 states that many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not acknowledge Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the antichrist. Well, this passage basically says that if you don't believe that Jesus is returning to earth in the flesh, then you are the embodiment of the antichrist. This could be applied to anyone who isn't a Jesus Christ in the flesh believer, which probably includes half of the world's population. So it can't be applied to Donald Trump as evidence of anything. And it's very, very broad in the way that it's applied to anyone, really. Daniel 7:8 states, "While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts." Now, finally, we're getting somewhere. This is something that could be attributed to Donald Trump. It's very specific. He is a renowned boaster. He knows more than anyone on practically every topic that he engages in, according to him, or at least he has been recorded in multiple interviews by the press, claiming that he knows more than anyone else. And he also boasts about his achievements and the impact that he's had on the future and the power that he yields. He claims confidence in every scenario. And well, come on, folks, regardless of whether you love him or hate him, we've all seen Donald Trump boast like it's going out of fashion. The Bible talks about boasting in a variety of places, but generally it boils down to being insolent, arrogant, prideful, and haughty. So this one kind of passage might be a tick in the box. Yes, Donald is a fit. And he certainly is a boaster. There are many other passages in the Bible that describe the Antichrist in a similar way, using different words and phrases. For example, Daniel 8:25 says, "He will magnify himself in his heart." Daniel 11:36 says, "He will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god." There are many, many examples, and what becomes very clear is that they may use a variety of different words, but regardless of what they use, the words that they use, they boil down to quite an accurate description if they are referring to Donald Trump. Boastful, in a very arrogant way. In Daniel 8:12, it says that the Antichrist will cast truth down to the ground. What this means is that he will speak many lies and untruths and do it as though the truth no longer exists, like it's been discarded, thrown away, and is of no value anymore. And he won't care if anyone sees him lying or not. The lies will just roll off the tongue as though they are the only thing, and the truth no longer exists. I'm not entirely sure if I'm up to date on this, but for a while I was aware of the tally of falsehoods that the Washington Post newspaper was keeping track of. It actually had a fact checker running on its website that showed every lie Donald Trump openly stated to the public, either in interviews or White House press releases, or in other methods of communication while he was acting as President of the United States. The Washington Post listed the statements by Donald Trump, and when they happened, each statement was listed as it happened, and it was marked as being either untrue or true, and what the truth actually was, if it was considered to be a lie. The last time I heard about this truth tracker, it had reached a count of, I think it was 30 or just over 30,000 lies. And that was a truth tracker that was confined to the 4 years of Donald Trump's presidency. So over 4 years, this averages out to 20 lies a day. And that's only the ones that the Washington Post was able to find out about, which means there may have been more behind the scenes. 20 lies a day is a lot of lies. I mean, I talk for a living and I talk every day. Sometimes I'm talking all day long about a variety of different subjects. And I'm going to tell you, I would actually find it really difficult to even think up 20 lies a day. It's quite an extraordinary accomplishment when you really think about it. And it's uniquely a Donald Trump thing. I mean, there will be people out there who don't believe that he lies that much, but those people are choosing to avoid knowing that he really did. They're not reading the news, they're not doing the research. Donald is and was, as president, a prolific liar. So this passage of the Bible is also a perfect fit. Now, Daniel 7:8 also references the little horn, and there is a compelling reason to attribute a reference to the little horn described in the Bible to Donald Trump. The words trumpet and little horn are used repeatedly in the Bible, and the word Trump also appears in the Bible twice. Trump is also an abbreviation of the word trumpet, which would actually clearly show a direct relationship between the word Trump and the reference to the little horn in the Bible, because a little horn is a little trumpet. Quite uncanny. You know, in the vast ocean of people's surnames, Trump is one of only a very, very few number of surnames in the world, maybe even just 4 or 5, that could be directly related to a little horn. Revelation 13:5 says, "And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months." Now, this is an interesting and very specific passage that we can compare against Donald Trump. Any reasonable person knows that Donald Trump's superpower, which is on display for everyone in the world to see, well, his superpower is to boast about himself, even to the point of cringe. And when he's not doing that, he tends to be saying very harsh and negative things about other people. There is always someone to blame and someone to call names when you are Donald Trump. The thing is that blasphemy is a much stronger word than simply trash talking or being unkind towards another person. Blasphemy is the action or offense of speaking sacrilegiously about God or other things that are considered to be sacred. Now, that last bit's really crucial. It's also the action of using profane language or talking about another person in a way that would cause them harm, either directly or indirectly, because it stoops to such a low level that all consideration of the person's welfare, which is a sacred thing, is thrown out of the window. Okay, sure. In movies or on TV, a character who's playing a certain role, well, they may very readily speak or act in a way that's blasphemous all the time, because the whole point is to cross the line. And that's what brings in profitable box office income or good TV ratings, the shock value. But in real life, there is generally a line which is drawn. Perhaps not if you are a mentally deranged gangster who also sells drugs to toddlers and violates any vulnerable person that you happen to come across, or any opportunity you can get. Of course, those kinds of people are feral in nature. They have a mental issue of some kind and have lost all sense of what it means to be bound by the unspoken rules of acting humanely towards one another. Right? And we don't come across those people very often, but we tend to be able to tell that they're mentally ill. And so, for example, in my life, there have been a few surreal moments, right? For example, that one time when I was walking out of King's Cross train station in London at around 8 o'clock in the morning, along with the rest of the city's commuters. And I was forced to walk right past this slovenly man sitting in the middle of the sidewalk, pleasuring himself in full view of anyone with the same misfortune that I had. Yeah, that's the level we're talking about when we talk about going so low that it becomes a topic outside the realms of what we define as normal human behavior. It's been very rare that I've witnessed anything at that level in real life, as opposed to, in movies and things. And I've lived in lots of places. And when I've seen something at that level, it has been quite clear that the person's depravity or lack of humanity is a symptom of their wide range of other mental health issues, which are also evident at the time. I've personally only ever witnessed one person act or speak in ways that are so low, that reached such a low level as to completely disregard the welfare of another person and make them vulnerable with simply words, deliberately blasphemous words intended to cause harm. And I'm not the only one. I'd say there's many people who've only seen that in one person, and the person that they've seen it in, notwithstanding all of the mental illness out there, right, is Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump has, on so many numerous occasions, sat comfortably protected by his immense power as President of the United States, surrounded by his 24/7 Secret Service protection, in his gated White House home, or the safe confines of his exclusive golf resorts or skyscraper penthouse condo. And he's tweeted words and phrases that, in an instant, set the unhinged segment of any supporter base into a frenzy where they had a person to blame for whatever their grievance was that happened to exist, and the person's home address and their children's names and their place of work and their phone number were just shared with them to do with as they will. The thing that makes Donald Trump stand out in this instance is that he isn't acting like a disheveled, fried egg for brains person pleasuring himself in full view of the massive metropolis. And so the willfulness that allows him to completely disregard the welfare of the person under attack comes from a different place, somewhere other than mental illness. And that makes this passage in the Bible something that, if other things also line up, uniquely attributable to Donald Trump. It's the deliberate cruelty with a sense of full impunity against a person who cannot protect themselves, does not have the power to fight back, and has been treated like they are unworthy of making a wrong move for fear of being utterly destroyed. That in itself could be a sign of the kind of evil that the Bible attributes to the antichrist. But not all by itself. In order for there to be a strong case for Donald Trump as the antichrist, there has to be more in the Bible that could only really refer to him. The thing about this verse, Revelation 13:5, is that it is quite a compelling passage because it also claims that the Antichrist will be given authority. Now, does this mean he will be given authority over a kingdom or a nation? It sure sounds like that. It sounds like that's the case. And the authority will be provided for 42 months. So let's see. Donald Trump was given authority over the United States when he was elected president in 2016. His authority lasted from midday, 20th of January 2017, until 11:59 a.m. on the 20th of January 2021. But that's 48 months. It's very close to what's written in the Bible, though, and we don't exactly know what the power dynamic was inside the White House during the Trump presidency. Is the Bible taking account of the 6 months in the beginning of the presidency when Donald Trump was learning the ropes? Does it take into account the approximate 6 months that it might have taken for him to get rid of anyone who might prevent him from being 100% in control or authority of his surroundings, and maybe replace them with people who would act in a subordinate manner towards him and give him full authority? Things like that. Let's look at this passage word for word again and see if there are clues. It says, "And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. I mean, we just don't know what could exist behind closed doors that shortened Donald Trump's ability to express full authority of the White House for 6 months during his presidency. Is it possible that his campaign for re-election took his attention away from his presidential decision-making in the final 6 months of his term? I wanted to see if I could find some clues about what might have cut Donald Trump's authority down from 48 to 42 months, if anything. So I did a search on July 2020 activities and news about the Trump presidency online, because obviously July 2020 is 6 months before the presidential reins were transferred over to Joe Biden. So it cuts it down to 42 months. The search results produced two main categories of news. The first was Donald Trump's campaign for re-election, kicking off with a speech at Mount Rushmore. And the second was related to the Trump White House COVID-19 response. I guess we can read anything we like into that, so I'm not sure that we have a definitive explanation of why 42 months of authority might be relevant to Donald Trump, given that he had 48 months of presidency. But it really is quite a close comparison, if not perfect, and it might even boil down to internal politics or something else that we couldn't possibly understand if we weren't in the room at the time. But it still isn't a perfect match, and we must keep that in mind. And there is, of course, the possibility that the Bible is talking about a future point in time. Donald Trump is, after all, running for election to the presidency again. And if he's successful, his next term would be another 48 months, or only 42 months if for some reason it was cut short. I have to say that overall, Revelation 13:5 is so far the most curious of all the passages that we've talked about today. So let's continue. So far, we've found examples of how the Bible generalizes the description of the Antichrist in a variety of passages that claim that any person who is not being 100% obedient to the principles of worshipping Christ, as prescribed in the Bible, is hosting the spirit of the Antichrist within them. I say this is generalized because it really is, because in reality it could be attributed to half of the world's population, maybe even more. However, as much as being untrue to Christ worship might apply to the 4 billion of us who are certainly meeting that criteria, there aren't many of us who also fulfill the other things discussed today so far. Not only would we need to reject Christ in the various different ways that that's interpreted, but we would also have to be a prolific liar, a prolific boaster who spends an undue amount of our time exaggerating our own abilities and elevating our own image to extraordinary heights, so that it stands out among other humans. We would also have to stoop to such extraordinary low actions, and in particular, very low harmful words, that we demonstrate in a practical disregard for the human welfare of whoever we target with our words. This really does narrow the margins of people in the world who could fit the criteria. So the people who could fit the criteria must be rejecting Christ in a manner that demonstrates them to be untrue to Christ's teachings. They must be a prolific liar. They must boast profusely and exaggerate their own worth to be above any other. They must speak or act in profane ways against other people, or in such a way that completely disregards the sacred lines drawn for humanity at large. And they must meet the criteria of a little horn, which is a kind of little trumpet. It's really narrowing down. Now, yes, that is a far smaller pool of people to choose from, but it still isn't enough to point the finger at Donald Trump specifically. So let's see what else appears in the Bible. So the Antichrist is also repeatedly referred to as the lawless one in the Bible. One section of the Bible really got my attention because so much of it seems quite unique to Donald Trump, as he has been described consistently in news articles across a wide range of reporting platforms. It appears in the book of Daniel as well. In fact, the book of Daniel is a wonderful source if you're researching the Antichrist, a wealth of nifty passages to choose from, dare I say. We will go into the various verses in the Bible that discuss more specific things about how the Antichrist can be identified by his method of arrival into our consciousness and his movements while he resides on earth, and how humanity responds to him in ways that might help us either narrow in on Donald Trump or demonstrate how he isn't the Antichrist. Some people believe him to be in next week's episode. But for now, I want to find more descriptive characteristics that appear for the Antichrist in the Bible that either can or can't be attributed to Donald Trump. Daniel 11:21 describes the Antichrist as vile. A vile person is someone who is indecent or crass or stoops to low levels that shock people and make them think very negatively of him. He's morally bad, wicked, and extremely unpleasant. These are all terms that appear in the dictionary when you look up the word vile. Also things like despicable or abhorrent and of no value as a person, And that no value refers more to the moral value or moral worth rather than their monetary worth as a person. It's a person who can't be trusted to act ethically, will take advantage of others, will cheat to get what they want, will go to lengths to be revengeful or harsh or rude, you name it. If it's awful and it really offends people so much that they cringe at the thought of being in his presence, then they are likely to consider the person to be vile. Well, as it happens, there are many people who do believe that Donald Trump is a vile person. There are also many who love him, but we're going to be covering those perceptions in next week's episode because the Bible discusses those people too. But safe to say, around half the world's population considers Donald Trump to be somewhere on the spectrum of vile. So he certainly fits the descriptions within this verse more than the average person in terms of scope. There is another description that sounds like a physical one in the Bible that I came across. It appears in Daniel 7:20, relating to how the Antichrist appears to be more stout than his fellow humans or fellow men. This would indicate that he is larger than those that he stands near. And it does seem that Donald Trump is a large man. He is quite tall, although probably not as tall as he sometimes claims to be. He appears to be somewhere in the region of 6 foot or maybe even as tall as 6'2". But the average man is generally around 5'11", and many are even shorter than that. Donald Trump is also a heavy-set man, although he has lost some weight for the campaign trails that he's been following recently. He wasn't always heavy-set, though. When he was younger, he was of average build, so that should also be taken into account. But as president, he was quite heavy, perhaps even the heaviest I've ever seen him, and so this should also be taken into account. But if you look up the word stout in the dictionary, not only does it mean, stocky or large, it also refers to a kind of arrogance. And so if this was the intention of the Bible, then Donald Trump definitely fits the bill perfectly. Once again, his declaration of being immune from everything, his exaggerated expertise in everything, and his disregard for things like manners and decorum and truth are all forms of arrogance. So regardless of how the word stout is interpreted, there are times when Donald Trump has always been a perfect fit, and there are also times where even if you're using all of the available definitions for the word stout, he's still a pretty good, if not perfect fit. And so now, one of the most profound descriptions of the characteristics of the Antichrist that really surprised me a little with its uncanny resemblance of Donald Trump. Let's talk about that. Even when it's taken alone without any other Bible verses. This one kind of leaves me wondering a little. So here it is. Daniel 8:25 reads as follows. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. So firstly, let's take a look at the first part of this verse. It says, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. Now, this section of the verse suggests that the individual being referred to in the verse, which is of course the Antichrist, will use cunning and deceit to achieve his goals. People who don't like Donald Trump often call him stupid or ignorant. However, I've never believed this to be true, not even a little bit. I actually believe that Donald Trump is a very clever man. He has, in fact, potentially outsmarted most of America and quite a sizable percentage of the world. He has his supporters who will never waver. They are steadfast and they don't care if he's accused or even what the evidence might be to prove against him. They don't care if he's lawless, and they don't even believe it, even when they see it with their own eyes. And they trust in every word he says. Even when they might know deep down inside that he's lying, they still trust him because he is quite a fibber. I'm sorry, but he really is. However, somehow Donald Trump has convinced his supporters so well to follow him in any direction he may lead them that this alone makes him very clever. But that's not all he's done. Donald Trump has also convinced a large number of influential people to stick up for him, even at their own detriment. Many people of influence and who have their own powerful status have paid the price for staying loyal to Donald Trump. To name only just a few people, Rudy Giuliani has lost his law license, has received hundreds of millions of dollars in law judgments against him that are collectively far more than he will ever earn or be able to ever pay off. He's also looking down the barrel of prison, and it's likely that he will go to jail soon enough. Steve Bannon is serving a sentence in prison at the moment, and he's a pretty smart guy. And he was also convicted of fraud previously as well. Plus, he has another criminal trial waiting for him when he gets out of prison. And it all links him to his relationship with and loyalty to Donald Trump, despite being quite a clever man. Alan Weisselberg is off to Rikers for the second time because of his loyalty to Donald Trump. Peter Navarro is also in prison due to Donald Trump. Plus, there are around 40 other prominent lawyers, consultants, and close confidants of Donald Trump who have either been convicted of crimes, been indicted, and are awaiting trial or have lost their law licenses due to actions they performed on behalf of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's interests. And of course, there have been, I think so far, 950 criminal convictions related to the events of January 6, 2021. So I guess suffice to say that Donald Trump has been quite clever about using other people, powerful sometimes and even influential people, to act as a buffer around him. Because despite all of these people facing criminal accountability for the actions they've performed on behalf of Donald Trump and his interests, Trump himself has never faced a day of jail. And that's very, very clever. A very clever man should never be underestimated. But that's not all. What about the media? Whether it's left or right or center or independent, freelance, corporate or otherwise, the media is hooked on Donald Trump. They elevate him every day with their relentless focus and obsession on his every word, his every move, and every moment they can find relating to his family, his friends, his activities, his plans, and anything else they can think of. The thousands of pundits and talking heads and content creators and speculators who make a living directly off Donald Trump stuff, anything. Donald Trump is the only man who ever lived who has ever captured the attention of seemingly smart people around the world in this way and for such a prolonged period. A stupid man, he definitely is not. He's clever, and anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is stupid is stupid. So the verse says that he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. When you boil this phrase down, it means that through no actual activity other than the activity of harnessing a cleverness, he will prosper. So think about this carefully and realize what the phrase is saying, because it perfectly applies to Donald Trump. And in a rare way, Trump doesn't build anything anymore. He isn't a businessman anymore, even if he was one in his youth. His Trump Corporation is in the process of being shut down and has been prevented from operating in the state of New York due to a series of anti-fraud judgments against him. But even so, Donald Trump is no longer a young man. I think he just turned 79, and so as most 79-year-olds do, he spends most of his time doing other things. He spends his time playing golf, speaking at rallies, socializing at his variety of private golf club resorts. He strategizes ways to make money for his campaign and for his personal use. And he does it by maintaining a name for himself. He is his craft, and that is how he prospers. And he is the only man alive who has ever done it so skillfully. So this aspect of the verse is perfect. It's a perfect fit, uniquely tailored to Donald Trump. So what's next? Okay, the next part of this verse says, and he shall magnify himself in his heart. Okay, this indicates that the person will be filled with pride and arrogance. We've covered this previously, and we already know that it fits Donald very well, but, it may also fit others as well. And then the next part of the verse says, and by peace shall destroy many. This section of the verse suggests that the Antichrist will use peace as a deceptive tool to destroy many people. He may come unexpectedly upon them when they are at ease and regard themselves as being in a state of safety. But it can also mean that the Antichrist doesn't go to war. Instead, he promotes what he describes as peace, but the peace comes at a price that will cause many people to be destroyed anyway. Think about what Donald Trump has promised he will do about the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, for example. Just one example. He said he would bring peace, but his version of peace is to cut off funding for Ukraine so that they can't afford to continue to fight against Russia. Yes, this will end the war and peace will ultimately prevail, but the people of Ukraine will be destroyed. Donald Trump's decision-making while he was president used the very same kind of tactics with regards to conflict in the Middle East. He simply chose to put America's powerful backing in the hands of whatever side he chose, leaving the other side powerless to fight back. And so the conflict might have officially ended, but many were destroyed in the process. I'm not saying it's the right or the wrong method to bring peace, but what I'm saying is that it does seem to fit the verse in the Bible. So the next section of this verse says, "He shall also stand up against the Prince of Princes." This implies that this person will oppose God. I can't really comment on this part of the verse. I either don't know enough about Donald Trump from my research so far, or the events might not have happened yet. But it is something that appears in the verse, so it would be something that we should keep in mind for later on. Now that we've heard the verse, one thing's for sure. If it happens, we will never forget this episode of the show. Never. And finally, the next section of the verse says, "But he shall be broken without hand." What this means is that the Antichrist will not be defeated by human hands, but only by the act of God. And this section of the verse lends itself directly to the concept of the lawless one, a title that is used frequently in the Bible relating to the Antichrist. The Antichrist is called the lawless one in Thessalonians 2:8 and 2:9. The idea of the lawless one is that he is an entity who will do as he pleases and give zero regard for whether his actions are legal. And somehow he will manage to always get away with the lawless behavior. No matter what is tried against him, he will not be held properly accountable and will serve no real punishment for his lawless behavior. So for a moment, consider what happened not that long ago. Donald Trump was at a rally, an outdoor rally. I think it was in Pennsylvania, and through the fault of the people who were meant to be protecting him in a variety of different ways, a situation was set up where a young shooter had a clear shot of Donald Trump and shot at Donald Trump in a perfectly aligned position. The bullet should have hit Donald Trump, but by some kind of unforeseen split moment in time, Donald Trump moved his head just enough for the bullet to graze his ear so insignificantly and superficially that he was able to walk around without a bandage and barely a mark on his ear a mere 2 weeks later. If he hadn't moved his head that quarter of an inch, he'd probably be dead because the bullet would have gone right through his brain. That is a billion-dollar moment of escape. And that kind of thing is extraordinary in itself. Between the books of Daniel and Thessalonians alone, a picture is painted of what appears to be a prophecy about a powerful and dishonest ruler who will rise to power using cunning and deceit, and that all earthly attempts to stop him will fail, even a direct shooting to the head. Donald Trump has spent his entire life in court cases as well. I think I heard somewhere that he had been the defendant in around 3,000 court cases in his lifetime. In almost all cases, he bullied or delayed his way into getting out of trouble, or he had a supporter on the inside. And even during the small number of times in which he lost the court case, he somehow turned it into some kind of a win anyway. Yes, he had filed for bankruptcy 5 or 6 times in his life, but it never prevented him from living in a gold penthouse or pooping on a gold toilet. Oh, and that reminds me, the Bible also talks about the Antichrist having a sort of obsession about gold as well. I do wonder if it meant the gold metal or the color gold or perhaps both. But either way, Donald does appear to be quite enamored by both the color and the appearance of the metal, having surrounded himself with both his entire life. Now, that is kind of weird and uncanny, but that's a side thing. And if necessary, we'll look at it in more detail next week. But none of the court cases that ever took place against Donald ever broke Donald Trump, despite there being 3,000 or so in his life so far. And yes, he's been criminally convicted of 34 counts of fraud recently, and his business is in the process of being shut down by receivers, and he's lost billions through mismanagement over the years, and he's filed for bankruptcy multiple times and had a university charged with fraud and a casino shut down, and the Trump steaks idea ultimately failed, and the Trump vodka idea ultimately failed, and all kinds of things related to allegations of fraud and allegations of sexual assault, and even legal judgments related to sexual assault and sexual abuse and slander, and goodness me, you name it. Donald Trump has been associated with more mud than any other person alive. And he's also the only president in American history who was impeached twice. But even with all of those badges of honor, he was not removed from office. He never has had to suffer any real instances of accountability that would cause him to miss a step. He remains wealthy and surrounded by gold and rich friends, and he sleeps in a bed that's probably worth more than my entire house. So that makes him one in a very small number of people in the world to have all of the criteria. So let's be very generous today and say that perhaps there's 100,000 people in the world who can meet all of the criteria that we've covered in the Bible so far and somehow be able to get away with it. 1 in 100,000 isn't really a very big number. And wait till next week, because then we start to get very specific. We cover particular locations and particular events that occur according to the Bible prophecy, and we will compare them to things we know about Donald Trump. Even if it's 1 million people in the world that meet all of the criteria, it's still a small number, but I do think it's less. And if it turns out that Donald Trump is the one, then there is only one way for him to be stopped according to the Bible. Because there's only one way that the Bible says that the Antichrist is stopped, and it requires a divine intervention. So I'll see you here next week, and we will see for ourselves what the outcome is. And then perhaps we might also get a chance to talk about what this means for humanity, either way. I'm Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams and Under on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who's listening on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you'd like to hang out and watch any of KGRA's shows while chatting with other spiritualists, experiencers, and weirdos like me, then consider signing up for full access membership at kgradb.com. Use promo code Ellie for 30% off your subscription. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.